When I got to CanJam SoCal, this headphone is the one I was most excited to hear. But it wasn't quite that way when I left. Let's talk about it. This is the Dan Clark Audio EXPANSE, the open back answer to the Stealth, a headphone known for being, well, one of the best measuring headphones on the planet. If you're looking for the Harman target. This continues that, which we'll talk about in the objective section, but first let's get into build and comfort. Build-wise, this is a really cool looking headphone. We have this sort of AI generative design looking exterior. I actually talked with Dan some about in the interview about this headphone. If you want to check that out, it'll be at the link in the video description. That's some footage from SoCal. I like the way it looks. It looks really, really cool. We continue the same style of fold-up ear cups that we got on things like the Noir, but with a slightly more refined design, and this headband, similar to what we see on the Stealth, with an elastic mechanism. It's actually very, very comfortable. It feels weightless on my head. Things are very, very evenly distributed, and the pads are of a great design and shape too. Inside the ear cups we see Dan's acoustic metamaterial, same thing that we saw on the Stealth, and that is some very thick front side damping, but that is part of how he's achieving this very, very linear frequency response. High rose connectors on the bottom, same thing we see on the Aeon line, which, well, shape-wise are very similar to the EXPANSE and Stealth. And there's not too much else to say about build other than that it is a very refined, well-built feeling headphone. It's comfortable, it's nice to hold, it's light on the head, and it looks good. I really can't complain in any aspect about the build. And I think build-wise, cable included, because a lot of times headphones have weird, hard, stiff cables. This one's very, very soft, connects easily, and it doesn't add too much weight to the headphone. Build and comfort's great. Like, they absolutely nailed that. So with that out of the way, let's talk about sound, subjective first, then we'll talk about objective sound and frequency response in the section after that. As I mentioned, when going to CanJam SoCal, this is the headphone I was most excited to hear. I saw the measurements of it and thought, wow, that is going to be really something. It's going to be like a Noir, but open back. But where it comes in, it's not a bad headphone, but it's not really what I would call an open back either. You put this on your head, you really can't hear the room around you. It sounds like I'm wearing a closed back headphone. I can barely hear any of this. It's very, very heavily damped. There's a lot of damping between the driver in your ear and the driver in the outside world. My voice is muffled like I'm wearing a closed back headphone right now. If I want to hear anything around me, I am taking it off. So I think this is more along the lines of being like a closed vented headphone, or maybe a semi-open. Not really what I would describe as an open back, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does change the sound characteristics a bit. As a result, we get more of a closed back sound. It is a little bit more spacious than the Stealth, I will give it that. And for the most part, well, it's a pretty linear sounding headphone. There's a few areas where it can be unpleasant. I do find the treble to kind of recess in some areas. The lower mid / upper treble are a little bit harsh, and it does get kind of muddy in the mid-bass regions. There's a bit of a bump happening there, and that's a bit more than I would want. Now that is a personal, subjective bit, but that is a dangerous area to have a bit of a bump. Vocal presence is a bit odd because the vocals have a bit of a tinny timbre to them. It does vary from track to track. Some vocals sound a bit more boomy if they're deep male vocals. Female vocals get a little bit more tinny and sometimes a little bit shouty, but overall vocal clarity is very, very good. I would say vocal clarity is probably one of the strongest points on this entire headphone. Though, as mentioned, and I'm sure you can pick up from how I was talking about the characteristics of vocals, timbre does suffer a bit. My main complaints with the sound of this headphone aren't necessarily tuning, but more about its other technicalities. It does sound a bit congested. There's not a lot of instrument separation. It's not particularly detailed. There isn't much dynamics or impact. It's very blunted sounding. And all of that for me was a big letdown because I really had high hopes based off the tuning. Which isn't to say it's a bad headphone. It's something that a lot of people are probably still going to like, and it's going to depend on the amplification you're using it with. At SoCal, the people who liked this headphone all liked it on very heavily colored sources, things like powerful tube amps and whatnot. And that is held true from my experience. If I'm using this on a powerful tube amp, well, it does start to shine through a bit. If I'm using it on something, say, Class A, it starts to shine through a bit. But amps that measure as good as this headphone, it just sounds very dead. It doesn't give me that hi-fi sound. It doesn't sound like a Harman Target headphone either, which it very much is. And with that, it kind of made me feel differently about the Harman Target. It made me like it just a little bit less, because I thought, well, if this is really the epitome of a Harman Target headphone, maybe I should be looking at a different Target. That sounds like a lot of negatives, I know. One of the most important things I feel like in a headphones experience is the actual comfort, and with that I feel like users will be able to get a lot of hours out of this headphone. I think that for the most part the tuning is inoffensive, that if people don't really care about those super fine details, they're going to find a pretty good headphone here. For me personally, I find this to be a step down from things like the Aeon Noir. For me, the Aeon Noir is still probably Dan's best headphone that he's put out, and I would have loved to see a continuation of that rather than going as much in this direction. If, however, Expanse is something that you think you'll like, I highly recommend it with the amps and sound amplifiers. A lot of people liked it on the Nautilus, which that is a pricey amp, don't get me wrong, but it really did take that amp and bring this headphone to life. Other things that worked reasonably well in combination, especially on the less expensive end, would be things like the Singzer SA1 and also the FiiO K9 Pro. Now the K9 Pro didn't fix the mid-bass, it didn't fix the dynamics or the impact or anything like that, but it did sort of help with the harshness in the upper mid-range lower treble and kind of brought a little more life into the upper treble, which feels a bit recessed in the, say, 6K to 10K region. And I want to note this one more time. I'm not trying to say this is a bad headphone. It is not the headphone for me personally. And there's probably people, in fact I remember people at SoCal, who absolutely loved it. And if pure objectivism is your goal, well, you could take this headphone, EQ that mid-bass down just a little bit, and have a pretty objectively incredible headphone. It's just the subjective areas where it kind of falls short for me. So with that said, let's talk about frequency response and objective sound. So as I mentioned, there is a bit of an elevation in sort of the mid-bass region. Between 100 and 200 hertz, we have this bump that kind of makes things get a bit muddier than I would hope. Rather than having an elevation here, what I feel like this headphone really needs is a bit more impact or dynamics in the lows, and I'm not sure if that is being blunted off due to either tensioning or due to the damping used on this headphone, but I feel like I could use a bit more there, and a bit less in terms of overall frequency response. This has pretty incredible target adherence through the mid-range and through most of the treble. Like I mentioned, we do have a bit of a recess between 6 kilohertz and close to 10 kilohertz. It's not massive, it's a small recess, but it is just enough that the frequencies of the treble that kind of dip down get overshadowed by the lower treble and upper mid-range. Specifically like 3 and 5 kilohertz kind of overpower the rest of the treble, making things a little bit harsh. Taking a step back though and looking at the overall objective sound, well, it is objectively very, very good. This is one of the closest Harman headphones you can find, with the exception of the bump between 100 and 200 hertz. And once again, if objectivism is your goal, well, you've got it right here. The DCA Expanse and the Stealth are shining examples of what happens when you adhere very, very closely to a target. And for some people, that will absolutely be what they're after. That will be their end game, and they won't have to touch another headphone. For me, that isn't quite the case, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing for the Expanse. If anything, it's a good thing for me because the Noir, which I'm looking at right now, is, well, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. And the Noir still keeps its place on my desk. Whereas this one, I will be sending back. So, DCA Expanse. Is this the right headphone for you? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you want something that's very comfortable and very target adherent to Harman, this is probably it. And I have to give Dan credit for making something that is truly unique in the current landscape of headphone. But also, it is not the right headphone for me. So with that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. Guys, if you liked it, please leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you think about target adherence, headphones measuring close to targets, and how that affects the future of audio. If you want to continue that discussion, you can at the forum at the link in the video description. I'd love to hear from you. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till the next one. Peace.